The emergency beacon had been transmitting for 73 standard cycles when the Galactic Council finally acknowledged what everyone already knew. The research station Kepler 439b was lost. The 12-member scientific expedition, representing 4 different species from across the Andromeda Trade Alliance, had vanished without explanation while studying the unusual quantum fluctuations emanating from the planet's core. Commander Zethki of the Valorian fleet pressed her scaled fingers against the briefing table's surface. Her reptilian features creased with frustration. The holographic display showed the last known position of the research vessel Scientific Endeavor before it had gone dark. The ship's automated systems had managed to transmit a single, terrifying message. Unknown entities, station compromised. Request immediate evacuation. Crew trapped in lower levels. The hegemony refuses to risk another ship, announced Council Representative Mordun, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he spoke. They've already lost 2 rescue vessels attempting to reach the station. Whatever is down there, it's beyond our current capabilities to handle. The assembled delegates murmured their agreement. The Theta Centauri Defense Force had attempted a rescue operation 30 cycles ago, only to have their entire squadron disappear in the same mysterious circumstances. The automated probe sent by the Rigel Consortium had managed to transmit partial images before its signal was cut. Images that showed the research station intact, but surrounded by some kind of energy field that defied conventional physics. "What about the inhabitants?" asked Dr. Yilmora, her crystalline form catching the light as she spoke. "Surely we cannot abandon our people to whatever fate has befallen them." "The station's life support indicators show minimal power remaining," Zethki replied, pulling up the technical readouts. "If there are survivors, they have perhaps 20 cycles before total system failure. Our long-range scanners detect no movement, no heat signatures, nothing to indicate life." The chamber fell silent. 12 scientists, researchers, and explorers from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, trapped on a hostile world with no hope of rescue. It was a scenario that had played out before in the annals of galactic history, always ending the same way. Another memorial service, another addition to the list of those lost to the unknown dangers that lurked between the stars. "There is one option we haven't considered," Mordun said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone of reluctance. "The humans." A collective intake of breath filled the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The humans, the newcomers from the small yellow star they called Sul, the species that had only joined the galactic community less than 50 standard years ago. They were still considered primitive by most civilizations' standards, their technology crude and their methods unorthodox. "The humans have no experience with this type of operation," Zethki protested. "Their fleet consists primarily of converted cargo vessels and outdated patrol craft. What could they possibly accomplish that our advanced forces could not?" "Perhaps that's exactly what we need," Dr. Yilmora interjected. "Advanced technology has failed us here. Maybe it's time to consider a different approach." The debate that followed was heated but brief. Time was running out for any potential survivors on Kepler 439b, and conventional rescue operations had proven futile. The human embassy had been monitoring the situation through their observers in the council chambers, and their representative, Ambassador Sarah Chen, had quietly indicated that her people might be willing to attempt what others had deemed impossible. Within 6 hours of the council's reluctant approval, the human response was swift and decisive. Rather than dispatching a single massive vessel or a fleet of advanced warships, Earth sent something unexpected. 3 small, angular ships that barely registered on long-range sensors. They were designated as tactical insertion vessels, though their designs were unlike anything the galactic community had encountered before. The lead ship, Razor's Edge, was commanded by Colonel Marcus Steele, a veteran of what humans called special operations. His team consisted of 12 specialists, each trained in what they termed unconventional warfare. The accompanying vessels, Shadow Strike and Ghostwalker, carried similar complement of soldiers, all volunteers who had responded to the mission briefing with what their commanders described as characteristic human enthusiasm. As the human task force approached the quarantine zone around Kepler 439b, the monitoring stations throughout the sector watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The human ships moved with an erratic pattern that seemed to defy tactical logic, their emissions signatures deliberately scrambled to prevent easy tracking. It was, according to every military manual in the Alliance database, exactly how not to approach a hostile situation. "Human vessel, this is Monitor Station Gamma 7, came the transmission from the Valorian observation post. "You are approaching the exclusion zone. Be advised that all previous rescue attempts have resulted in total loss of contact." Colonel Steele's voice crackled back through the comm system, carrying a tone of casual confidence that made the alien observers exchange worried glances. "Copy that, Gamma 7. We're well aware of the situation down there. Don't worry about us. We specialize in places where others fear to tread." The three human ships disappeared into the planet's atmosphere with a suddenness that startled the monitoring crews. One moment they were visible on sensors. The next they had vanished, as if they had never existed. The advanced tracking systems of the Galactic Alliance, capable of following objects through hyperspace itself, simply lost contact. "Did they crash?" asked the duty officer aboard Monitor Station Gamma 7. "Unknown," replied the sensor technician, frantically adjusting his equipment. "I'm reading no debris, no energy signatures, nothing. It's as if they've been completely absorbed by whatever's down there." Down on the planet's surface, the reality was far different. The three human ships had not been destroyed or captured. They had simply employed technology and tactics that the galactic community had never encountered. Stealth systems based on principles that other species had dismissed as impractical, combined with piloting techniques that bordered on reckless by conventional standards, had allowed them to slip past whatever defenses protected the research station. Colonel Steele stood in the cramped briefing compartment of the Razor's Edge as his team made final preparations. The 12 men and women under his command represented the finest that Earth's military had to offer. But they looked nothing like the polished soldiers of the Galactic Alliance. Their equipment was a mixture of high-tech gear and what appeared to be improvised modifications. Their weapons were simple kinetic projectile systems rather than the energy-based armaments favored by other species. To an outside observer, they might have appeared to be little more than armed primitives. "Listen up," Steele began, his voice cutting through the pre-mission tension. "We've got 12 people down there, trapped for over 70 days. The automated systems show minimal life support, which means if anyone's still alive, they're hanging on by threads. Every other rescue attempt has disappeared without a trace, which tells us we're dealing with something that conventional forces can't handle." Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, checked her gear one final time. "Any intel on what we're facing, sir?" "Next to nothing," Steele admitted. "The last transmission mentioned unknown entities and that the crew was trapped in the lower levels. Whatever hit them was fast enough and powerful enough to overwhelm a fully equipped research station in minutes. The energy readings are off the charts, suggesting some kind of exotic technology or natural phenomenon." Corporal James Wright, their electronics specialist, looked up from his scanner array. "The good news is that whatever's jamming external communications doesn't seem to be affecting our short-range systems. We should be able to maintain contact between teams." "That's something, at least," Steele nodded. "Remember, our mission is search and rescue, not engagement. We get in, find survivors, and get out. If we encounter whatever took down the other rescue teams, we avoid direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary." The ship's pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, called back from the cockpit. "Colonel, we're approaching the research station. Landing in 60 seconds. Through the small viewport, the structure came into view. The research station was an impressive feat of engineering, a multi-level complex designed to house long-term scientific expeditions. It should have been bustling with activity, its lights blazing against the planet's perpetual twilight. Instead, it sat in darkness, only a few emergency indicators flickering weakly against the alien landscape. But it was what surrounded the station that caught their attention. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that appeared to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process drifted slowly around the complex, their movement hypnotic and somehow threatening. "Well, that's new," muttered Sergeant Rodriguez, pressing her face against the viewport. "Anyone else seeing dancing math problems out there?" "Extra-dimensional phenomena," Wright confirmed, his instruments going haywire as they approached. "The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases. Whatever's generating this field operates on principles we don't understand." "Then it's a good thing we don't need to understand it," Steele replied grimly. "We just need to get past it. Kim, take us down to the primary landing pad. Stay ready for immediate dust-off if things go sideways." The Razor's Edge touched down with barely a whisper, its advanced dampening systems absorbing the impact. Around them, the other two ships settled into positions that would provide covering fire if needed, while maintaining quick escape routes. It was a textbook insertion, executed with a precision that would have impressed even the most critical military observers. As the boarding ramp lowered, the team got their first direct look at their surroundings. The planet's atmosphere was breathable, but carried an odd metallic taste that made their instruments flicker. The ground beneath their feet felt solid enough, but there was a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from deep underground. "Motion detectors are picking up something," Wright reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Multiple contacts, but they're moving in patterns that don't match any known biological signatures." Steele raised his hand, bringing the team to a halt just outside the station's main entrance. The doors stood open, which in itself was ominous. Research stations maintained strict environmental protocols. There was no reason for them to be breached unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Override the automatic systems," he ordered. "I want manual control of everything from here on out. Whatever happened to the previous rescue teams, I don't think it was conventional weapons fire." As they approached the entrance, the shimming energy field intensified. The geometric shapes that had been drifting lazily through the air began to move with more purpose, forming complex patterns that seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence. There was something deeply unsettling about them, as if they operated according to laws of physics that the human mind wasn't equipped to comprehend. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered, her voice tight with tension, "I don't think those things are natural phenomena." "No," Steele agreed, watching as one of the shapes passed close enough to their position that he could see the way it seemed to bend light around itself. "They're not. But that doesn't change our mission. 12 people are counting on us to bring them home." The team moved forward into the darkened station, their weapons ready but their primary focus on speed and stealth. Behind them, the alien landscape continued its strange dance of impossible geometry, while ahead lay the unknown depths of a research facility that had become a tomb for everyone who had tried to breach its secrets. What they didn't know was that deep in the station's lower levels, in a heavily shielded compartment that had been their last refuge, 11 survivors of the original research team were still alive. They had been listening to the approaching footsteps with a mixture of hope and terror, knowing that every previous rescue attempt had ended in silence. Dr. Kethenyi, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, pressed her ear against the sealed door of their shelter. Her crystalline form had dimmed considerably over the past 70 cycles, her energy reserves nearly depleted. Around her, the other survivors, 2 Valorians, 3 Rigelians, 4 Centaurians, and 1 being from a species she didn't recognize, waited in desperate silence. "Are they real?" whispered Engineer Mortek, his forearms wrapped around his knees as he rocked back and forth. Or is it another trick of the entities? I don't know, Kethany admitted. But the footsteps sound different. Heavier, more purposeful. What none of them could have imagined was that their rescue was about to be undertaken by representatives of a species that the galactic community still considered to be barely civilized barbarians. The humans who now moved through the station's corridors with deadly efficiency were about to demonstrate why their particular brand of controlled chaos had made them legendary among the few who had witnessed it in action. The real test, however, was yet to come. For the entities that had claimed the research station and eliminated every previous rescue attempt were far from dormant. They had been waiting, learning, adapting, and now, as new prey entered their domain, they began to stir with anticipation. The stage was set for a confrontation between human ingenuity and alien horror, between conventional tactics and improvised solutions. In the depths of the research station, where the very laws of reality seemed to bend and twist, 12 soldiers from Earth were about to face their greatest challenge yet. And somewhere in the lower levels, 11 desperate survivors were about to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. The interior of the research station was a testament to galactic engineering excellence, with smooth walls that seemed to glow with their own internal light and corridors wide enough to accommodate beings of various species. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an impressive display of interspecies cooperation and technological achievement. Now, however, it felt like a mausoleum. Colonel Steele motioned for his team to spread out as they entered the main corridor. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources, and the air carried that same metallic taste they had detected outside, only stronger now. Their boots made soft sounds against the polished floor, each footstep seeming unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Life sign detectors are showing multiple contacts in the lower levels, Wright reported quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 11 distinct signatures, all clustered together about 4 levels down. Looks like they've barricaded themselves into some kind of reinforced compartment. That's good news, Steele replied. What about the entities that were mentioned in the last transmission? Wright's face went pale as he studied his readings. Sir, that's where it gets weird. I'm picking up energy signatures throughout the station, but they're not matching any known technology or life form patterns. They seem to phase in and out of existence, like they're not entirely present in our dimensional space. Sergeant Rodriguez hefted her weapon, a modified assault rifle that fired explosive-tipped rounds designed to penetrate alien armor. So we're dealing with ghosts that can apparently kill entire rescue teams. Wonderful. Not ghosts, corrected Dr. Sarah Matthews, the team's xenobiologist and the only civilian member of the squad. Based on the energy readings, I'd say we're looking at entities that exist partially in higher dimensional space. They can manifest in our reality, but aren't bound by our physical laws. Can we hurt them? Asked Corporal Martinez, the team's heavy weapons specialist. Unknown, Matthews admitted. But if they were completely invulnerable, they wouldn't have bothered to hide from the Galactic Alliance forces. There must be some way to interact with them, even if we don't understand the mechanism. The team moved deeper into the station, their formation loose but professional. Unlike the rigid tactical doctrines favored by most galactic military forces, human special operations teams were trained to adapt their strategies on the fly. Where other species would have advanced in perfect synchronization, the humans moved like a pack of predators, each member covering different angles and approaches simultaneously. As they descended to the second level, the first signs of what had happened to the research team became apparent. Workstations had been abandoned mid-task, with data screens still displaying half-completed experiments. Personal belongings were scattered across the floor as if their owners had fled in panic. But there were no bodies, no signs of conventional weapons fire, no evidence of physical violence. "It's like they just vanished," muttered Private Chen, the team's medic, as she examined an overturned chair. "Whatever happened here, it was fast and thorough." "Sir," Wright called out, his voice tense, "I'm picking up movement on the thermal sensors. Something big, approximately 50 meters ahead and closing on our position." The team immediately took defensive positions, their weapons trained on the corridor ahead. The emergency lighting flickered, and for a moment, the shadows seemed to coalesce into something approaching a recognizable shape. Then the light stabilized, and there was nothing there. "Contact lost," Wright reported. "Whatever it was, it's gone now." "Or it never existed in the first place," Rodriguez muttered. "I hate this psychic nonsense." Dr. Matthews was studying her instruments with intense concentration. "Actually, I think I'm beginning to understand what we're dealing with. The energy patterns suggest that these entities exist primarily in a parallel dimensional space. They can project themselves into our reality, but only temporarily and with significant energy expenditure. That would explain why they didn't just overrun the entire sector," Steele mused. "They're powerful, but they have limitations. The question is, how do we exploit those limitations to get our people out?" The answer came sooner than expected. As they reached the third level, the first direct encounter with the entities occurred in a way that none of them had anticipated. Private Thompson, who had been checking a side corridor, suddenly stopped moving. His body remained perfectly still, but his weapon began to turn toward his teammates with mechanical precision. "Thompson!" Rodriguez shouted, but the soldier didn't respond. His eyes were open but unfocused, as if he was looking at something that existed beyond the visible spectrum. Wright's scanner went haywire. "Massive energy surge! Something's interfacing directly with his nervous system!" Without hesitation, Colonel Steele made a decision that would have horrified the commanders of any Galactic Alliance force. Instead of attempting to subdue Thompson with non-lethal methods or calling for specialized equipment, he simply walked up to his possessed teammate and delivered a precisely calculated blow to a specific nerve cluster at the base of his neck. Thompson collapsed instantly, but as he fell, a sound like breaking glass echoed through the corridor. The entity that had been controlling him became visible for a split second, a writhing mass of crystalline structures that existed in too many dimensions for the human eye to properly process. Then it was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone. "Is he alive?" Dr. Matthews asked, rushing to Thompson's side. "Unconscious but stable," Chen reported after a quick examination. "Whatever that thing did to him, the neural pathways are returning to normal." "Fascinating," Matthews murmured, studying her readings. "The entities can interface with biological nervous systems, but they require an active connection to maintain control. Disrupt that connection violently enough, and they're forced to retreat. Which means they can be fought," Steele concluded. "We just need to think outside conventional parameters." The team continued their descent, now armed with crucial intelligence about their enemy. The entities were powerful, but they operated according to rules that could be learned and exploited. More importantly, they had demonstrated a vulnerability to unexpected tactical responses, something that humans had been perfecting for centuries. On the fourth level, they encountered their first physical manifestation of the entity's power. The corridor ahead had been twisted into an impossible geometric configuration, with walls that curved back on themselves and floors that existed at angles that defied three-dimensional physics. Emergency lighting flickered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. "Standard approach would be to find an alternate route," Wright observed, studying his scanner readouts. "But according to the station schematics, this is the only way to reach the survivors." "Then we go through," Steele decided. but not the way they expect us to. What followed was a perfect example of human tactical flexibility. Instead of attempting to navigate the twisted corridor on foot, Sergeant Rodriguez produced a series of explosive charges from her pack. The other team members took cover as she placed them at strategic points along the walls. "Fire in the hole!" she called out, triggering the detonation sequence. The explosion that followed was not particularly sophisticated by galactic standards. Simple chemical explosives, the kind that most advanced species had abandoned millennia ago in favor of more refined energy-based weapons. But the effect was devastating in ways that the entities clearly hadn't anticipated. The twisted geometry of the corridor simply collapsed, the exotic energy fields unable to maintain their configuration under the crude but effective assault of high explosives. The walls returned to their normal positions, the impossible angles straightened out, and the malevolent presence that had filled the space retreated with what sounded distinctly like surprise. "Problem solved," Rodriguez announced cheerfully, brushing debris from her armor. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. As they approached the lower levels where the survivors were located, the attacks became more frequent and more sophisticated. The entities seemed to be learning from each encounter, adapting their strategies to counter human tactics. But what they couldn't account for was the sheer unpredictability of human responses. When faced with a corridor filled with energy patterns that induced hallucinations, Private Chen simply closed her eyes and navigated by sound and touch, her medical training allowing her to ignore the sensory distortions that would have incapacitated most beings. When confronted by entities that could phase in and out of physical reality, Corporal Martinez discovered that his flamethrower's plasma stream remained effective regardless of the target's dimensional state. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Matthews made a crucial discovery about the nature of their enemy. As the team paused to regroup on the 5th level, she studied the energy readings from their previous encounters and realized something that changed everything. "They're not trying to kill us," she announced suddenly, at least not directly. "Every attack has been focused on incapacitation or control. They want to capture us, not destroy us." "Why?" Steele asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Because they're collectors," Matthews replied grimly. "The research team, the previous rescue attempts, they're not dead. They've been absorbed somehow, incorporated into whatever dimensional space the entities call home. We're not just dealing with hostile aliens. We're dealing with predators that collect sentient beings like specimens." This revelation changed the entire dynamic of the mission. The survivors weren't just trapped by hostile forces. They were being hunted by entities that viewed them as valuable additions to some kind of interdimensional menagerie. And every moment they delayed increased the chances that the entities would complete their collection process. "Double time," Steele ordered. "We get our people out now, before these things figure out how to counter our tactics completely." The final descent to the survivors' location was a running battle through corridors that shifted and twisted as the entities threw everything they had at the human rescue team. But each attack was met with responses that defied conventional military doctrine. When faced with energy fields that disrupted electronic equipment, the humans switched to purely mechanical devices. When confronted by entities that could predict tactical movements, they abandoned tactics altogether in favor of pure improvisation. Private Johnson discovered that his grandfather's vintage firearm, a simple kinetic weapon that fired metal projectiles, was more effective against the entities than any of his high-tech gear. Sergeant Williams found that shouting at the top of his lungs disrupted their concentration, apparently because they were accustomed to the quiet efficiency of Galactic Alliance forces. Even something as simple as throwing a boot at one of their manifestations proved effective at breaking their dimensional anchor points. As they reached the final corridor leading to the survivors' location, the entities made one last desperate attempt to stop them. The entire area around the reinforced shelter was filled with a complex energy matrix that created multiple overlapping dimensional distortions. It was, by any reasonable standard, an impenetrable barrier that should have stopped any rescue attempt. Colonel Steele looked at the swirling mass of impossible geometry, considered his options, and made a decision that would have given any Galactic Alliance commander nightmares. He ordered his team to fix bayonets, actual physical blades attached to their rifles, and charge the barrier directly. What happened next defied every principle of advanced warfare known to galactic civilization. 12 humans, armed with primitive kinetic weapons and simple steel blades, ran screaming into a sophisticated multidimensional defense matrix. The entities, accustomed to dealing with technological solutions and rational tactical approaches, were completely unprepared for what amounted to a berserker charge. The energy fields designed to repel advanced weapons and sophisticated attack patterns simply couldn't process the chaotic mixture of explosive rounds, flamethrower streams, shouted battle cries, and medieval-style blade work that the humans brought to bear. The dimensional distortions flickered and failed as the entities retreated in confusion, unable to maintain their complex constructs in the face of such overwhelming irrationality. Within minutes, the barrier collapsed entirely, leaving the way clear to the survivors' shelter. As the smoke cleared, Colonel Steele found himself standing outside the reinforced door behind which 11 desperate beings had been waiting for over 70 days for rescue. "This is Colonel Marcus Steele, Earth Special Operations," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the shelter's comm system. "We're here to take you home." The response from inside was immediate and emotional. Voices in multiple languages, some crying, some laughing, all expressing the same overwhelming relief. They had been rescued, and by the least likely species in the galaxy. But as the shelter door began to open, both the rescuers and the rescued knew that their ordeal was far from over. They still had to get back to their ships, past entities that would certainly attempt to prevent their escape. The difference now was that the humans had proven something important. Advanced didn't necessarily mean better, and sometimes the most primitive solution was also the most effective. The real test of their abilities was still to come, as they would have to extract 11 exhausted survivors through a station full of hostile entities that were undoubtedly already adapting to counter-human tactics. But for the first time since the crisis began, there was genuine hope that everyone might make it home alive. The humans had done what the most advanced military forces in the galaxy could not. They had penetrated the entity's defenses and reached the survivors. Now they had to prove they could get everyone out again, against opponents who were learning to counter their unconventional methods with every passing moment. The shelter door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing 11 figures that looked like they had been through 7 kinds of hell. Dr. Kethenyi emerged first, her crystalline form dim and cracked from weeks of stress and inadequate nutrition. Behind her came the others, Valorians whose scales had lost their luster, Rigelians whose normally pristine environmental suits were patched with improvised repairs, and Centaurians whose 4 arms trembled with exhaustion. "Humans!" whispered Engineer Mortek, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "They actually sent humans!" Colonel Steele quickly assessed the survivors' condition while his team established a defensive perimeter. Most were ambulatory, though clearly weakened by their ordeal. 2 Valorians showed signs of severe dehydration, and one of the Rigelians appeared to have sustained injuries during the initial attack that had never properly healed. "How many of you were there originally?" Steele asked Dr. Kethenyi, who seemed to have emerged as the group's leader during their captivity. 12, she replied, her voice cracking with emotion. "Dr. Veltar was taken during the first wave of attacks. We managed to seal ourselves in here before the entities could claim the rest of us." "Taken where?" Dr. Matthews asked, her scientific curiosity overriding tactical concerns for a moment. "Somewhere else," Kethenyi said, shuddering. "We could hear him sometimes, calling out from spaces that shouldn't exist. The entities, they don't just kill, they collect. They add to themselves. Sergeant Rodriguez was examining the shelter's defenses with professional interest. How did you manage to hold out for so long? According to our intel, every other group that encountered these things was overwhelmed in minutes. Quantum shielding, replied the injured Rigelian, Dr. Sil Andros. The shelter was designed to protect against exotic radiation during our core studies. It seems the entities have difficulty maintaining coherent manifestations through quantum flux barriers. That's useful information, Steele noted, but we can't stay here. Our ships are waiting topside, but we need to move now before these things adapt to our presence completely. The extraction plan that followed was pure human improvisation at its finest. Rather than attempting to retrace their route through the station, Steele made a decision that shocked even his own team. They were going to blast their way straight up through the station's floors, creating their own exit route. "Sir, that's going to compromise the structural integrity of the entire facility," Wright warned. "Good," Steele replied grimly. "If this place collapses behind us, it makes it harder for the entities to follow. Rodriguez, break out the heavy charges. We're going to mine our way to the surface." What followed was a display of destructive efficiency that left the alien survivors speechless. The human special operations team had come prepared for anything, including the possibility that conventional routes might be blocked. Rodriguez's demolition charges were placed with mathematical precision, creating a controlled series of explosions that carved a direct path upward through multiple levels of the research station. But the entities weren't about to let their prizes escape so easily. As the first explosions shook the station's foundations, the dimensional distortions returned with renewed fury. The air filled with geometric shapes that hurt to perceive directly, and the temperature dropped to levels that made breath visible even through the survivors' environmental suits. "They're pulling energy from the planet's core," Dr. Silandros observed, his instruments still functioning despite their ordeal. "They're desperate enough to risk destabilizing the entire quantum matrix." "How bad is destabilizing the entire quantum matrix?" Corporal Martinez asked, while laying down suppressing fire at shapes that flickered in and out of existence. "Think of it as the difference between a firecracker and a nuclear weapon," Matthews replied tersely. "If they lose control of that much energy, this entire section of space could be rendered uninhabitable." Colonel Steele absorbed this information without breaking stride. "Then we'd better make sure they don't lose control. How long do we have?" "Based on current energy fluctuation rates, perhaps 10 standard minutes before cascade failure," Silandros calculated. "Plenty of time," Steele announced with confidence that surprised everyone present. "Rodriguez, triple time on those charges. Everyone else, prepare for rapid vertical extraction." The next few minutes were a masterclass in human military efficiency under impossible circumstances. While the entities threw increasingly desperate attacks at them, the rescue team methodically blasted their way upward through level after level of the research station. Each explosion was precisely timed and positioned to maximize structural damage while minimizing risk to personnel. But it was how they handled the survivors that truly impressed the alien observers. Where other species might have treated the rescued personnel as helpless cargo to be protected, the humans immediately integrated them into the operation as valuable team members. Dr. Kethenyi found herself providing real-time analysis of entity behavior patterns, while Engineer Mortek used his technical expertise to identify structural weak points that would speed their ascent. "This is not how galactic military doctrine operates," Kethenyi murmured to Sil Andros as they climbed through a hole that had been blasted through 3 floors simultaneously. "They treat us as equals, not as victims." Human combat philosophy appears to be based on adaptive cooperation rather than rigid hierarchy, Sil Andros agreed. "Most fascinating." The entity's final gambit came as they reached the upper levels of the station. Instead of trying to stop the humans and their charges individually, They focused their efforts on a single, massive manifestation that blocked the path to the surface. The creature that materialized was unlike anything they had encountered before, a writhing mass of crystalline structures and impossible angles that existed in at least 6 dimensions simultaneously. It filled the corridor completely, its presence warping reality to the point where the station's walls became fluid and the floor shifted like liquid. Energy discharges arced from its surface, each one powerful enough to vaporize conventional matter. It was, by any reasonable standard, an unbeatable opponent. Colonel Steele looked at the manifestation, considered his options for approximately 3 seconds, and made another decision that would have given galactic military theorists nightmares for years to come. "Everyone close your eyes and cover your ears," he ordered. Then he activated every piece of electronic equipment his team carried and overloaded them all simultaneously. The electromagnetic pulse that resulted was crude, uncontrolled, and completely devastating to any technology within 50 meters. It knocked out their own equipment, disrupted life support systems, and sent cascading power failures throughout the entire station. It was, according to every principle of advanced warfare, an act of tactical insanity. It also worked perfectly. The entity's manifestation flickered and dissolved as its dimensional anchor points were disrupted by the chaotic electromagnetic interference. Unable to maintain coherence in the face of such technological mayhem, it retreated to whatever space it called home, leaving the path to the surface clear. "I can't believe that worked," Private Chen muttered as emergency lighting flickered back online. "Believe it," Rodriguez replied cheerfully. "Sometimes the best high-tech solution is to break all the technology." They emerged onto the station's main landing platform to find their ships waiting exactly where they had been left, their pilots ready for immediate departure. But as the survivors were helped aboard, it became clear that the crisis wasn't entirely over. The planet itself was beginning to show signs of instability, as the entity's desperate energy manipulations started to cascade through the quantum matrix. "We need to get clear of the planetary gravity well," Lieutenant Kim called from the cockpit. "The quantum fluctuations are getting worse." The 3 human ships lifted off with a precision that impressed even the exhausted survivors. Unlike the ponderous vessels favored by most galactic civilizations, the human tactical insertion craft were designed for speed and maneuverability above all else. They climbed through the planet's atmosphere like bullets, their engines screaming at power levels that would have made safety inspectors from any other species faint with horror. As they cleared the atmosphere, the monitoring stations throughout the sector watched in amazement as energy readings from Kepler 439b began to normalize. Whatever the humans had done down there, it had apparently convinced the entities to withdraw their influence from the planet's core systems. "This is Monitor Station Gamma 7 to Human Task Force," came the transmission from the Valorian observation post. "We're reading successful extraction of all personnel. Repeat, all survivors are accounted for." "Copy that, Gamma 7. Colonel Steele replied. "Mission accomplished. Request immediate medical support for the survivors and full debrief preparation." As the human ships moved away from the planet, the alien survivors found themselves struggling to process what they had experienced. For over 70 days, they had been trapped by entities that had effortlessly defeated the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. Their rescue had seemed impossible, their situation hopeless. And then 12 humans with primitive weapons and absolutely no respect for conventional tactics had walked through defenses that had stopped entire fleets. "How?" Dr. Kethany asked Dr. Matthews as they sat in the Razor's Edge's medical bay. "How did you succeed where others failed?" Matthews considered the question carefully before answering. "I think it's because we don't try to fight fair. Every other species in the galaxy has developed sophisticated military doctrines based on logic, efficiency, and technological superiority. When they encounter something that operates outside those parameters, they try to counter it with even more sophisticated responses. And humans? Silandros inquired from the adjacent medical bed. Humans cheat, Matthews said simply. We use whatever works, regardless of whether it's elegant, efficient, or theoretically sound. Those entities were expecting rational responses to their attacks. Instead, they got explosive rounds, shouted battle cries, and electromagnetic pulses created by deliberately breaking our own equipment. Engineer Mortek was studying the humans' gear with professional interest. Your technology is deliberately designed to be modular and improvised. Most galactic species optimize for perfection and reliability. Perfection is inflexible, Sergeant Rodriguez observed from where she was cleaning her weapons. When you're dealing with the unknown, adaptability beats optimization every time. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the bridge. All ships were approaching the Galactic Alliance rendezvous coordinates. Prepare for transfer of survivors to medical facilities. As the 3 human ships approached the massive Alliance medical vessel that had been dispatched to receive the survivors, the galaxy's attention focused on what many were already calling the Kepler 439b incident. In the space of less than 12 hours, a species that most civilizations still considered primitive had accomplished what the combined forces of the Galactic Alliance could not. The debriefing sessions that followed would be analyzed by military strategists for decades to come. The humans' tactics, their equipment, their methods, all of it flew in the face of established military doctrine. They had succeeded not despite their apparent primitiveness, but because of it. Council Representative Mordun found himself facing a room full of military commanders and civilian leaders who were struggling to comprehend what they had witnessed. The humans had volunteered for a suicide mission and turned it into a textbook rescue operation using methods that no galactic civilization had ever considered. Perhaps, he said quietly, we have been too quick to judge these humans by our own standards. Their approach to warfare is not sophisticated by our measures, but it appears to be uniquely effective against threats that conventional forces cannot handle. Commander Zethke nodded slowly. They think like predators rather than soldiers. Every decision is made based on what will work, not what should work according to military theory. Dr. Yilmora, her crystalline form restored to its normal brilliance after medical treatment, addressed the assembled council. The entities that held us were older than our civilizations, more advanced than our technology, and more powerful than our fleets. But they had never encountered anything like human tactical thinking. They were prepared for logic, not chaos, for sophistication, not brutality, for advanced weapons, not explosive charges and medieval blades. The implications were staggering. If humans could succeed where the most advanced civilizations failed, what did that say about the nature of technological advancement? About the value of sophistication versus adaptability? About the assumptions that underlay galactic civilization itself? As the survivors were transferred to proper medical facilities and the human task force prepared to return to Earth, one thing was becoming clear to everyone involved. The galaxy had seriously underestimated humanity. These weren't primitive barbarians playing with forces beyond their comprehension. They were apex predators who had evolved in one of the most hostile environments in known space, and their methods reflected that heritage. The rescue of the Kepler 439b survivors would mark a turning point in human galactic relations. No longer would humanity be seen as junior partners in the galactic community. They had proven themselves as specialists in what the galaxy euphemistically called asymmetric warfare, the art of winning battles that couldn't be won through conventional means. And in the dark corners of space where conventional forces feared to tread, that reputation would prove invaluable. For the galaxy was vast and full of dangers that sophisticated weapons and advanced tactics could not counter. Sometimes what was needed was not perfection, but adaptability, not elegance, but effectiveness. Sometimes what was needed was humans. As the Razor's Edge entered hyperspace for the journey home, Colonel Steele sat in his quarters writing his after-action report. It would be brief, factual, and completely inadequate to convey the reality of what his team had accomplished. But that was fine. The humans had never been ones for boasting about their capabilities. They preferred to let their actions speak for themselves. And today, those actions had spoken very clearly indeed.